Overlord Volume 4 Chapter 2. Chapter 2 Gathering, Lizard Men. Part 1. The sun was high in the sky after half a day's ride on Ro. Zayusu reached his destination without encountering any of the enemies he had been worried about. There were several houses here which resembled those of the Green Claw tribe, surrounded by barricades of sharpened stakes pointing out on all sides. The gaps between the stakes were fairly large, but they were enough to keep away monsters like Ro. There were fewer structures here than in the Green Claw tribe, but each of them was larger. Therefore, he could not determine which tribe had more people. Each building flew a flag which waved in the wind. Said flag was emblazoned with the lizardman symbol for Red Eye. Indeed, this was the first destination Zayusu had picked, the tribal dwelling place of the Red Eye tribe. After looking around, Zayusu breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, they still lived where his past information had told him they would be. He had feared that they had migrated after the previous war, and he would have to start by finding their tribe. Looking back at the direction from which he came, Zayusu saw his own village at the limits of his vision. They must surely be preparing an ample welcome for their incoming guests. While he had felt uneasy when he had left his village, he was quite certain now that they would not be attacked. The best proof of that was Zayusu's safe arrival here. While he was not sure if that was an oversight by that so-called Supreme One or if this development fell within the predicted scope of events. It would seem the enemy did not intend to go back on their word, and neither did they intend to stop the lizard men from preparing themselves. Of course, even if the forces of that Supreme Whatever did show up, Zayusu had no choice but to follow through with all his might. Zayusu dismounted from Ro and stretched lazily. Although riding Ro for long periods of time made his muscles stiff, stretching like that filled him with comfort. After that, Zayusu indicated that Ro should stay where he was and wait. Then, he took out some dried fish from his saddlebags and fed him to Ro for brunch. Originally, he had intended to have his people bring their rations here, but he could not give that order because it might have damaged the Red Eye's hunting grounds. After patting all of Ro's heads, Zayusu set forth by himself. If he had kept Ro by his side, the presence of the Hydra might leave the other side too wary to come out and speak. Since Zayusu had come to propose an alliance, he did not want to pressure them unduly. Water splashed around his feet as he advanced. From the corner of his eye, Zayusu noticed several warriors of the Red Eye tribe following his movements from within the barricade. Much like the warriors of the Green Claw tribe, they wore no armor and carried long spears, each of which was essentially a long stick tipped with a sharpened head of bone. Others carried slings, but the fact that none of them had discharged projectiles at him suggested that they had no intention of attacking right away. Zayusu did not wish to agitate him either, so he slowly drew closer until he reached their main gate. Then, he turned to the lizard men watching him warily, and shouted at the top of his voice. "I am Zayusu Shasha of the Green Claw tribe. I seek an audience with your chief." After some time, an old lizardman holding a gnarled staff arrived. He was trailed by 5 strapping members of his tribe. The old lizardman's body was painted with white designs. "Is he their high priest?" Zayusu cut an impressive figure even as he stood there waiting. Currently, they were equals. Thus, he could not show any sign of weakness. Zayusu remained still even as the priest inspected the brand upon his chest. "I am Zayusu Shasha of the Green Claw. There is something I must discuss with you. Though I do not wish to welcome you, our leader has decided to grant you an audience. Come with me." This roundabout reply left Zayusu somewhat confused. What baffled him was why he did not call their leader chief. Quote, In addition, they had not asked him for any proof of his identity. That said, it would be troublesome if he spoke too much and upset them. With a vague sense that something was wrong, Zayusu followed behind the group of lizard men. He was taken to a well-appointed little house. It was easily larger than Zayusu's brother's house, back in his village. The walls were decorated with designs drawn with rare paint, implying the high status of its occupant. Curiously enough, this house lacked windows, though it had ventilation holes scattered throughout its walls. Like any other lizardman, Zayusu could see just fine in the dark. However, that did not imply they enjoyed living in darkness. That being the case, why did this leader live in a dark little hut like this? Questions like that popped up in Zayusu's mind, but nobody would answer them for him. Looking back, he saw that the priest and the warriors who had led him here were nowhere to be found. When he had first heard the people leading him tell everyone else to leave, he had thought they were being too careless, and he had almost asked why they had done this. However, once Zayusu learned that the request came from the village's leader, its acting chief, his respect towards the person within the hut only grew. Zayusu had promised his elder brother that he would return safely, but that did not imply he had to come back unharmed. Surrounding him with armed warriors to apply pressure would do no good. Rather, if they had done that, he would have been disappointed at their lack of insight. However, if the opposition had already anticipated that, and put on this great show for him, does that mean I'll be dealing with a skilled negotiator? Zayusu purposely ignored the people watching him from afar. He marched up to the door and loudly shouted, "I am Zayusu Shasha of the Green Claw tribe. I was told that this tribe's leader was here. May I request an audience?" A faint voice came back granting him entry. It was a female voice. Zayusu entered without a moment's hesitation. As expected, the interior was pitch dark. While he possessed dark vision, the dramatic change in light levels made Zayusu blink. An acrid odor hung in the air, possibly from some kind of herbal concoction. Zayusu had expected an aged female, but the voice easily shattered that preconception of his. "I bid you welcome." The voice had come through a door from the interior of the dark room, so he had assumed that it must have belonged to someone old. But now, he realized that her voice was young and full of vigor. As Zayusu's eyes finally adjusted to the ambient light, the form of a lizardman resolved itself within his field of vision. Snow White. That was the first thing Zayusu thought when he saw her. Her scales were as white as snow and bright as day, clean and free of imperfections. Her round, shiny eyes were crimson, glowing like rubies. Her slender body was not masculine, but feminine. Her body was covered in red and black tribal designs indicating that she was an adult, that she knew many spells, and that she was unmarried. Dear reader, have you been stabbed by a lance before? Zayusu had. It was a searing pain that made him feel that something hot had been forcefully pressed against his body, an agony that pulsed through his body in time with the beating of his heart. Zayusu experienced something like that. Only, it did not hurt, but Zayusu stood silently in his original position. His counterpart's reaction to his silence was unreadable. With a mocking smile, she asked, "It would seem even the bearer of frost pain, one of the four treasures, regards me as an aberration as well." In the wild, albinism was a very rare condition. That was because albinos were very obvious and they had a hard time serving the rigors of life. The same applied to the lizard men, who possessed some degree of civilization. That was because they lacked the technology to enable people who feared the sun and had poor eyesight to survive. As a result, there were very few adult albino lizard men, and some were even killed at birth. Among the lizard men, being considered a mere nuisance was already quite good. In the worst-case scenario, some were even regarded as monsters. That was the meaning of the mockery in her smile. However, none of that applied to Zayusu. "What's wrong with you?" the surprised female inquired of Zayusu, who was frozen solid at her doorstep. Zayusu's answer was a cry that grew high-pitched near the end, with some warbling in the middle. The lizard woman's eyes went wide and her jaw dropped slightly. It encompassed her surprise, confusion, and embarrassment. That sound was known as a mating call. After realizing the foolish act he had unconsciously performed, his tail swished back and forth. The lizardman equivalent of a human blush. It thrashed so violently that it seemed as though the house would be torn down. No. No, that's not it. I didn't mean that. Zayusu's panicked reaction seemed to calm the female down. Her teeth ground against each other in a creaking laugh, and then she tried to comfort him in an exasperated tone. "Please calm down. It'll be quite troublesome for me if you lose control here." Sorry." After apologizing, Zayusu entered the hut. By now, the lizard woman's tail lay flat on the ground. It would seem she had finally managed to regain her composure. Still, its tip twitched and shuddered, which hinted that she had not completely calmed herself down yet. "This way, please." "Thank you." The female ushered Zayusu to what looked like a seat on the ground that looked like it had been woven from plant fibers. She took a place opposite him once he sat down. "Pleased to meet you. This one is a traveler from the Green Claw tribe, Zayusu Shasha. Thank you for your formal introduction. I am the acting chief of the Red Eye tribe, Crush Lu." After introducing themselves, the two of them studied each other, as though conducting an appraisal of their counterpart. The brief silence filled the hut, but it could not last. Zayusu was a guest, so it fell to Crush as the host to speak first. Then, "Your Excellency, let's not stand on ceremony. I would like us to be able to speak freely, so it'll be all right to relax." Zayusu nodded in response to the request for openness. "I'm grateful for that. The fact is, I'm not used to speaking formally myself. Now then, why have you come here?" Crush had an idea already, despite her question. The mysterious undead being had appeared in the center of their village, and it would seem someone else had used cloud-controlling magic of the 4th tier, control clouds. In addition, the visitor was a lizardman hero from another tribe. Thus, there could only be one answer. Just as Crush was wondering how to react to Zayusu, she heard an answer which completely exceeded her expectations. "Please marry me." For a moment, Crush wondered if her ears had been mistaken. "Granted, that's not why I came. In addition, I know very well that this sort of thing ought to come after we've finished discussing business. However, I can't deny what I feel in my heart. I suppose you can mock me as a foolish male. Oh." After hearing these words that she had never heard before since birth, and which she believed would never be directed at her, a storm of chaos tore Crush's heart apart, and she was completely unable to focus. Zayusu smiled bitterly as he saw Crush in that state, and continued, "I'm sorry, I really am. I shouldn't be doing something like that at a time like this. I don't mind if you tell me your answer later." At great length, Crush had finally managed to gather her thoughts once more, or at the very least she had managed to begin thinking again. In any event, she finally calmed down, but as Zayusu's words appeared in her mind, she felt as if her head would burn up at any moment. She studied the face of the male opposite her, taking care not to let herself be noticed as she sized up his stoic expression. "I can't believe he can be so calm after saying that sort of thing to me. Does he make proposals like that often? Or is he used to having people court him? Granted, he is very handsome. What am I thinking? This must be his scheme. Yes, that's right. Clearly, he's just trying to wind me up. Besides, it's not as though anyone would propose to someone like me. Having never been treated as a woman before, she was thrown into turmoil by this experience. She did not notice the way the tip of Zayusu's tail twitched slightly. The male before her was also struggling to control his emotions and keep him from erupting forth. Thus, silence passed between them for a time. It would take a while before the two of them could cool their heads, heated by feverish thoughts. After enough time had passed for them to regain their composure, Crush realized that they should return to the original topic for now. Just as Crush thought to ask Zayusu about his reasons for coming to this village, she recalled what he had just said. How could I ask something like that? Crush's tail slapped the ground with a thwap. The male before her shuddered, as though he had been physically struck. Crush panicked, realizing that this was very rude behavior. Even if he was a traveler, he was still a representative of his tribe. Neither was he an ordinary lizardman, but a hero who bore frost pain. This was not the attitude she ought to be taking with someone like that. But it's all your fault. Just hurry up and say something already. Zayusu had chosen silence because he was embarrassed about what he had done, but Crush had not discerned that as she tried to put a lid on the volcano within her heart. The silence continued. Realizing that this could not go on, Crush made up her mind and decided to change the subject. Given that you're not afraid of the way I look, imagine you must be very brave, am I wrong? As he heard Crush's self-deprecatory reply, Zayusu replied with an expression that seemed to say, "What nonsense are you spouting? What on earth is he thinking, anyway?" Crush thought. I said, "Do not fear this white body of mine. It's like the snow that covers the mountains. It is a beautiful color." And of course, he would have to say the one thing which nobody had ever spoken to her before. What is this man saying? Unable to bear the strain from within, the lid on Crush's emotions burst off, never to be seen again. Seeing Crush at a total loss for what to do next, Zayusu casually reached out and touched Crush's scales. His hand grazed over those lustrous, beautiful, seemingly polished scales which were somewhat cool to the touch. Shah! Crush gasped in what sounded like fright. That sound seemed to cool their heads off somewhat. Both of them knew something was happening to them, but they could not hold themselves back. Panic filled them. Why had he been unable to control himself and touched her? And why had she let him do it? These questions became anxiety, which in turn became confusion. In the end, their tails thumped repeatedly on the ground, so forcefully that the entire house seemed to shake. Before long, their eyes met, and they realized the state of each other's tails. Then, their tails froze mid-motion, as though time had stopped for them. One could describe the mood in the air as heavy. The word, tense, would also be quite applicable. Silence descended upon them once more, and they studied each other as stealthily as they could manage. After that, Crush finally managed to compose herself. With a look in her eyes which said that she would not let any lies get by her, she asked, "Why did you do that all of a sudden?" While Crush had not adequately expressed what she wanted to say, Zayusu seemed to have picked up on her meaning, and gave a direct and honest answer. "I believe that's what they call love at first sight. Also, we might die in this battle, so I didn't want to leave any regrets behind." Crush was left dumbfounded at how to reply to Zayusu's earnest confession. However, there was something within those words which she could not accept. "So even the bearer of frost pain feels he might die. We don't know about the enemy, so we can't take them lightly. Did you see the monster they used to relay their message? The one which came to our village looked like this." Zayusu handed Crush a sketch of the monster in question. She looked it over, and nodded. It's the same one. Do you know what kind of monster it is? No. Nobody else in my tribe knows, for that matter. Is that so? Well, I've seen a monster like that before. Zayusu's voice trailed off here, and then he studied Crush's reaction after saying, I ran from it. I didn't beat it. Or rather, it nearly killed me. After realizing how potent the monster was, Crush breathed a sigh of relief. It would seem holding the warriors back had been the right thing to do. That thing can confuse one's mind with its wails, and it's an incorporeal creature. Unenchanted weapons are useless against it, so I couldn't overwhelm it with numbers. We druids have spells which can temporarily enchant weapons. Can you defend against mental attacks, then? We can improve resistance to such attacks, but protecting everyone's minds is beyond me. I see. Can all priests cast spells like that? Almost any priest can bolster resistances, but I'm the only one in my tribe who can ward against confusion. Crush realized that Zayusu's breathing was somewhat ragged. It would seem he had realized that Crush's position was not for show. Indeed, Crush Lu was a veteran druid, and her powers were probably in excess of any other high priest among the lizard men. When will the Red Eye tribe be attacked? They said we would be the 4th. Is that so? Then, what do you plan to do? Time passed. Crush debated the merits and demerits of telling him. The Green Claw tribe would surely choose to fight, and Zayusu was most likely here to secure an alliance to fight with them. How could she turn that to the advantage of the Red Eye tribe? The Red Eyes had never intended to form an alliance. They had intended to flee. After all, fighting anyone who could use 4th-tier spells was foolish in the extreme. There was no other conclusion they could draw given that their opposition could deploy the undead as well. However, would it really be wise to tell them that? As her thoughts swirled within her head, Zayusu narrowed his eyes, as though he was going to bare his soul to her. Let me state my honest opinion. Crush did not know what Zayusu would say next, and kept her eyes trained on him. What worries me is what will happen after we evacuate. Crush had no idea what Zayusu was talking about. Zayusu calmly explained himself. Do you think you can continue living as you always have after leaving a familiar place? I don't think so. No, it would be close to impossible, right? If they left this place and built a new life elsewhere, that would entail entering a new environment. They would have to bet their lives in a struggle for life and death for survival and win. And in truth, the lizard men were not the rulers of this lake. They had fought for years to carve out their niche in these wetlands. A race like theirs could not easily uproot themselves and thrive in unknown territory. That is to say, it might be difficult just to find food and shelter, am I correct? Indeed, Crush replied in a somewhat shrill tone that conveyed her doubts. Then, what would happen if the 5 tribes all tried to evacuate at once? Crush was speechless, because she had already divined Zayusu's true intentions. The area around the lake was spacious, but anywhere that a particular tribe fled to would also be hotly contested territory for the other tribes. In other words, just moving to a new place would spark a battle for survival. On top of that, they would all be fighting over the fish that was their staple food. What would happen if events unfolded in that way? For all they knew, something terrible might occur, like that war from the past. So you're telling me, the reason why you want to fight despite our lack of confidence is? Yes. It is not just a matter of my own tribe, but I have also considered how to thin the ranks of the other tribes. What kind of a reason is that? That was why he wanted them to close ranks and fight. Even if they lost, the number of lizard men would be decreased. The idea was a radical one, the idea that everyone was expendable besides the warriors, hunters, and priests. Yet, she could understand the rationale behind it. Or rather, when one took a long view of things, sacrificing everyone else was the wisest choice. If there were fewer lizard men, they would not need so much food. In that way, the various tribes might be able to coexist in harmony. Crush searched for some way to deny that idea of his. You're telling me that you want to reduce our numbers and make a new life elsewhere without even knowing how dangerous our new home will be. Then let me ask you this: what happens if we easily win the battle for our survival? When the supply of fish runs low, will the 5 tribes slaughter each other again? For all we know, it might be easier to catch fish in future. And what if it isn't? Crush had no idea how to answer Zayusu's cold retort. Zayusu seemed to be assuming the worst-case scenario while planning, which seemed like an extreme position to Crush. If they did as she was thinking, then a tragedy would play out when times got tough. However, if they did as Zayusu implied, then said tragedy might be averted. In addition, even if the adult lizard men died in battle, it would be a glorious death for them. If anyone refuses our proposition, then we will have to march against them first. His low tones made Crush shiver. What he meant was that he would not allow the Red Eye tribe to migrate elsewhere with their numbers undiminished. It was a sensible conclusion, and a very appropriate one. When the depleted tribes ran into the Red Eye tribe whose strength was undiminished, they would be at risk of annihilation. In order to avoid that, the only choice they had was to assault any tribes which did not choose to join the alliance. It was a perfectly rational decision to make from the perspective of a leader whose people were in danger, and if she were in his position, she might well have made that decision as well. I feel that so long as we form an alliance, even if we lose, there will be a minimal chance of us killing each other when our tribes relocate to new lands. Crush did not understand the meaning of those words, and her ignorance showed on her face. It was then that Zayusu decided to explain himself in simpler terms. I feel that the alliance will foster a spirit of mutual cooperation and change our perspectives. Everyone will be comrades who have shed blood together, and not people from different tribes. So that's it, Crush murmured as enlightenment dawned on her. In other words, the tribes which had fought alongside each other might not necessarily descend into violence once food ran scarce. However, given Crush's opinion and her past experiences, she wondered if they could reach such a state. Just as Crush lowered her head and began her contemplation, Zayusu asked, "Come to think of it, how did your tribe survive that period, anyway?" Crush jerked her head up, like she had been jabbed by a needle. She turned stiffly towards Zayusu, who had a look of surprise on his face. So he really didn't know about it before he asked. While they had not known each other for a long time, Crush had a rough grasp of Zayusu's personality, and her instincts told her that his question posed no threat to her tribe. Crush narrowed her eyes and stared at Zayusu, as though trying to penetrate to him with her piercing gaze. She knew that Zayusu would be confused about why someone was looking at him like that, but even so, she still had to do it. "Must I tell you?" Her tone was filled with disdain and resentment. So great was the change that it made Zayusu wonder if he was speaking to someone else. However, Zayusu would not back down here, because this was potentially a lifeline that could save everyone. "I would like to hear it. Was it by the power of the priests? Or was there another way? Perhaps there might be a way to save." Zayusu cut his words off halfway. If there was really a way to save everyone, then the look on Crush's face would not have been so bitter. Perhaps Crush had sensed what Zayusu was thinking, but she laughed, as though to mock herself. "You're right. There's no way to save everyone. She stopped here, and smiled tiredly. We resorted to cannibalism, eating our dead comrades. The incredible shock left Zayusu speechless. Killing the weak, reducing their numbers was not forbidden, but eating one's fellow man was an unclean practice, a taboo among taboos. Why is she telling me this? Why is she telling me something she should have kept a secret all her life, to someone outside the tribe, to a visitor? Could it be that she doesn't intend to let me leave alive? No, it doesn't seem like that. Even Crush was surprised at why she was telling Zayusu all this. She knew very well that her tribe would be vilified for it. But why? And then she continued speaking, as though her mouth were no longer under her control. At that time during the tribal war, our tribe was in dire straits due to a lack of food. However, we did not participate in the fighting because our tribe had more priests and comparatively fewer warriors. The priests could create food with magic. As though under the control of another will, Crush carried on. However, the food that the priests created with magic was little more than a stopgap measure, and our tribe was slowly and surely heading towards destruction. However, the chief suddenly brought back some food one day. Fresh red meat. Perhaps I wanted to confess my sins to him. The sound of Crush gnashing her teeth filled the air. The male before her listened silently. If he was repulsed by it, he showed absolutely no sign. Crush was thankful for that. Everyone had an idea of what that meat was. There had been strict laws laid down, and those families who violated them had been exiled. The chief only brought that meat back after those exiles had left. But everyone ignored their suspicions and ate the meat in order to survive. Of course, things could not go on like that forever. Everyone's pent-up feelings reached a head, and then they exploded. Crush closed her eyes and recalled the face of the previous chief. We, who ate that meat, even when we knew what it was, we were guilty of the same crime as the chief. When I think about it now, it almost seems laughable. After she finished her monologue, Crush looked Zayusu in the eye. As she saw no sign of revulsion in his eyes, a secret thrill of delight ran through her, followed by surprise at her joy. Why was she so happy about this? Crush began to realize the answer to that question. Please look at me. Sometimes, people like myself appear in the Red-Eye tribe. When they grow up, they develop some form of special ability. In my case, I was talented at priestly magic. Therefore, I was in the running to be the next tribal chief. And so I raised my banner in revolt against the chief. That battle split the tribe in two, but we won because we were stronger. And so your stores of food were now adequate because your numbers had decreased. Yes. And in the end, our tribe survived. When we rebelled, the chief held out until the bitter end, and he died after being covered in countless wounds. Before he received the fatal blow, he looked at me and smiled. The words slipped painfully from Crush. That was the guilt which had been festering in her heart ever since she killed the previous chief. She could not confess these sins of hers to the people who had stood by her, complicit in her treason. But now, she could unburden herself to Zayusu. That was why she was going on and on about the past. It was a smile which I did not expect from someone looking upon the person about to murder them. There was no hatred, resentment, hostility, or malice there. It was such a beautiful smile. I was wondering, could it be that the chief had done all this after taking everything else into consideration? In contrast, we were merely acting out of hostility and idealism. The chief was the one in the right. And after the chief died, that is to say, after the scapegoat for all our sins had been killed, our tribe united once more. In addition, he left us the parting gift of solving our food shortage. By now, Crush had already reached her breaking point. She had struggled for so long with her guilt and the burden of becoming the acting chief. Thus, when she let herself break down, she would do so with tremendous force. However, Crush swallowed the impending deluge inside her, because she knew that if she allowed her thoughts to fall into chaos, she might not even be able to speak. A quiet sobbing filled the air. Biologically speaking, it was an insignificant amount of tears, but the fact was that on a psychological level, she had been broken to the point of weeping. What a frail little body she had. In the natural world, weakness was intolerable. While children were still a protected group, there was little difference between male and female lizard men. All of them valued strength. From that point of view, he should be scorning the female before him. After all, how could the leader of a tribe show weakness before a member of another tribe before a stranger? However, Zayusu thought differently. Perhaps he felt that she was a beautiful female, but more than that, she seemed to him like a warrior. She was a warrior who had been wounded, who was panting and in despair, but yet she continued forging ahead. Zayusu felt that this was merely revealing her vulnerable side. If she was still willing to stand up and advance, then she was not weak. Zayusu leaned close, and gently wrapped his arms around Crush. We are not all-knowing, and each of us might make a different decision in a different situation. If it were me, I might have done the same thing. But I don't want to try and comfort you or anything, because there's no such thing as a right answer in this world. All we can do is to choose to move on, and I feel that even after all the regret and misery and the wounds that cover the soles of your feet, all you can do is choose to press forward. The warmth of their bodies flowed into each other, and the tiny tremor of their heartbeats went with it. For a moment, it felt as though their hearts were slowly syncing up with each other. What a strange feeling. This was a warmth Zayusu had never felt before in his life. It was not because he was embracing a lizardman. Could it be that it's because I'm holding this female Crush Lu in my arms? Before long, Crush wriggled free of Zayusu's chest. Zayusu briefly regretted the departure of her warmth, but he kept silent because he did not know how to express that feeling. It seems I've embarrassed myself in front of you. Do you think less of me now? What do you mean, embarrassed? Do I look like the sort of male who would laugh at someone who carried on moving forward despite their wounds and worries about the future? But I think you look very beautiful. The white tail curled, and slapped repeatedly at the ground. Oh dear. Zayusu did not inquire about what Crush had meant by those words. Instead, he asked another question. Right, does the Red-Eye tribe raise fish? Raise? Yes, as in breeding and nurturing fish to be eaten. We don't do that, because fish are a blessing from nature. From what Zayusu could tell, no lizardman tribe had ever practiced fish breeding. That was because they felt that growing their own food was a form of blasphemy. That seems to be what the priests, what the druids think. Could you try to change their minds and persuade them to raise fish to fill their bellies? The priests in our tribe seem to have accepted that. Crush nodded. Then, I shall teach you how to raise fish. The important thing is their feed. You need to feed them with the fruits conjured by druidic spells. The fish grow large and fat when fed on those. Is it really all right for you to tell me the secrets of fish rearing? Of course. There's no point hiding it. It's more important that I help as many tribes with that as possible. Crush bowed deeply to Zayusu and lifted her tail in thanks. You have my utmost gratitude. Well, you don't have to thank me, but in return, I'd like to ask you something again. The emotion disappeared from Crush's face, and that shift in attitude calmed Zayusu's heart down. This was a question he could not evade. Zayusu took a deep breath, and so did Crush. And then, Zayusu asked, what does the Red-Eye tribe intend to do about the coming battle? After what we discussed yesterday, we are currently in favor of fleeing. Then, Acting Chief Crush Lu, let me ask you one more time, do you still feel the same way? Crush could not answer him. It was only natural to hesitate, given that this concerned the fate of the Red Eye tribe. However, Zayusu could do nothing about that response but force a smile to his face. You have to make that decision. I believe the reason why the previous chief smiled at you was because he was entrusting you with the tribe's future. That being the case, now is the time to live up to his trust in you. That's all I have to say. The rest is up to you. Crush's round eyes panned around the room. It did not imply she wanted to flee or seek help, but that she was searching for the right answer within her heart. No matter how it ended up, all Zayusu had to do was accept her answer. As acting chief, may I ask how many people you intend to evacuate? For the time being, we are planning to evacuate 10 warriors, 20 hunters, 3 priests, 70 males, 100 females and some children. As for the others, depending on the circumstances, we might have to let them all die. Crush stared off into empty space and murmured, "Really now? Then, please give me your answer, Acting Chief Crush Lu of the Red Eye tribe." Crush considered her options. She could kill Zayusu. Personally speaking, she did not want to do that, but it was a different matter in her capacity as acting chief. How about killing him and fleeing with the rest of the village? Crush abandoned that line of thought, because it was an extremely dangerous gamble and it concerned their future. Besides, there was no guarantee that he really had come alone. Then, how about agreeing with him and then running away with everyone? That would probably be problematic too. If they tried to be clever and messed up instead, it might lead to a war with the Red Eye tribe, one that would lead to an extermination of their people. After all, their intention was to reduce the population, and it did not matter who had to die for that to happen. Ultimately, if he did not receive an answer agreeing to an alliance, he would probably lead an army to the Red Eye tribe to destroy them. However, she did not know if Zayusu had realized there was a flaw in that plan. The problem of food scarcity still remained. Then, enlightenment dawned on Crush, and she smiled. There had never been a way out to begin with. From the moment Zayusu had proposed the alliance. From the moment he had suggested they work with the Green Claw tribe. The only way for the Red Eye tribe to survive was to ally with them and join the battle together. Zayusu should have realized that as well. Even so, he wanted Crush to give her answer. He probably wanted to see if Crush, the leader of her tribe, was worthy of standing beside him as his comrade. After that, all that was left was to speak her decision. However, if she told him, many people would surely die. Still, let me get one thing straight. We are not fighting to die, we are fighting to win. I may have said a lot of things that made you uncomfortable, but as long as we beat the enemy, we can laugh it all off. I hope you understand that. Crush nodded to show that she understood. He was a compassionate male. With that, Crush replied with her decision. We, the Red Eye tribe, will join you, because I do not wish to make the previous chief's smile meaningless, and also because I want to give the Red Eye tribe its best shot at survival. Crush bowed deeply, and lifted her tail. Thank you very much. Zayusu nodded, and his firmly erect tail spoke more of his emotions than his words ever could. It was morning. Zayusu looked toward the main gate of the Red Eye tribe's village, from where he stood in front of Ro. His mouth opened, and a yawn slipped out. He was still feeling a little tired, because he had been sitting in on the tribal meeting of the Red Eye tribe until late last night. However, time was of the essence, and he had to visit another tribe by today. Zayusu furiously battled the specter of sleep, but he lost his fight and yawned again, louder than before. While Ro was hardly a stable ride, for some reason he felt that he could still fall asleep on top of it. Zayusu glanced at the sun, which seemed bright yellow despite having just risen, and then he looked back at the main gate. A feeling of confusion came over him, because something strange had walked out from it. It was a bundle of grass. It was a set of garments that had been made with long strips of cloth and stuffed full of long grasses. If it lay down on the marsh, it would look like a pile of weeds from a distance. Ah, where have I seen a monster like that before? As Zayusu recalled the sights he had seen as an adventurer, Ro growled in a threatening fashion from behind him. Of course, Zayusu knew who that pile of weeds was. There was no doubt about it. After all, her white tail peeked out from it. As he stared dumbly at the swaying tail and absent-mindedly rubbed Ro to calm it down, the pile of weeds had already drawn up to Zayusu. "Good morning. Good morning. It seems you've gathered the tribe." He looked toward the dwellings of the Red-Eye tribe. It was filled with a frantic energy, with many lizard men running back and forth. Crush stood aside to watch, and then replied, There were no problems with that. We should be able to reach the Razor Tail village by today, and we've already picked out the people that we're going to evacuate." According to the spells cast by the priests from the village, the Razor Tail tribe was the first to be attacked. The fact that the first tribe to be attacked was not the Dragon Tusk tribe was a godsend when they considered the time they had left. "Then, why are you coming with me, Crush?" "The answer is simple, Zayusu. But before I answer you, tell me this: what do you intend to do next?" After the long meeting that had lasted from evening to the middle of the night, neither of them felt uncomfortable about addressing each other by their first names. Even the way in which they spoke had changed, probably because they had come to be familiar with each other. After this, intend to visit another tribe, the Dragon Tusk tribe. They're the tribe that values strength over all things, right? I've heard that they have the greatest fighting power of all the tribes. That's right. Since we haven't had much contact with them, we'd best prepare ourselves for anything. Everything about them was shrouded in mystery, so even proceeding to their domain was a very risky matter. In addition, they had absorbed the survivors of the two tribes which had been disbanded during the previous war, so that made things even more dangerous. Zayusu had distinguished himself during that war, so he would be a hated nemesis for the survivors of those two tribes. Even so, they were the tribe whose strength they most need during the upcoming conflict. So that's it. Then it would be better for me to accompany you. Why? Is it strange? The weed pile rustled softly. Zayusu had no idea what those words meant because he could not see her face. It's not strange. More that it's very dangerous. Is anywhere safe during these times? Zayusu could not reply to that. When he thought calmly about it, there were many advantages to bringing Crush along. However, as a male, he did not want to bring the female he loved to a place where he knew great danger was waiting. I really can't calm down. He could not see Crush's face inside the weed pile, but she seemed to be smiling. Then I'll ask you another question. Why are you dressed like that? Is it ugly? It was not ugly so much as bizarre. However, would it be better to praise her for it? Zayusu did not know how to answer, but after some thought, he sized up the expression he could not see and replied, "Well, I should say it looks good." "Does it?" As if. Crush shut him down with a flat denial. That was probably why Zayusu felt weak all of a sudden. "It's simply because I don't deal well with sunlight. Thus, I need to dress up like this whenever I go outside." "I see. Ah, you haven't given me your answer yet. Will you let me come with you?" No matter what he said to her, it would all be pointless. Having her around would be advantageous to his aim of forging an alliance. She must have suggested as much because she felt the same way. Thus, there was no reason for him to refuse her. I understand. Then, please lend me a hand, Crush. With a sense of joy that seemed to come from the bottom of her heart, Crush replied. I understand. Leave it to me, Zayusu. Are you ready to set out? Of course. My pack is filled with everything I need. After hearing that, Zayusu looked at her back and found a bulge there. The thick scent of fresh grass and other herbs came from it. Since she was a druid, she ought to have skills pertaining to herbs and the like, so it must be filled with such materials. Zayusu, you look tired. Yes, I do feel a bit weary. The past 2 days have been pretty busy, so I haven't had time to sleep. Just then, a white-scaled hand emerged from under the mass of weeds. Here, this is a rikiriko fruit. Eat it, skin and all. The hand proffered him a brown-colored fruit. Zayusu placed it into his mouth and bit down on it without hesitation. A bitter taste filled his mouth, chasing away his fatigue. While it was barely passable in terms of flavor, after chewing it several times, an explosion of flavor bloomed on his tongue. In addition, even the breaths he exhaled had the same taste on them. Moo. What's this cool sensation that's filling my head? Zayusu had unconsciously adopted his elder brother's verbal tic. Crush could not help but giggle as she saw him. Your desire to sleep has gone away, right? But the fact is that it isn't really gone, so don't get too used to it. It would be best to find somewhere to rest. Every breath Zayusu took in and released filled him with bliss, as did the full-body sensation of coolness. He replied, then, I'll take a nap while I'm on Ro. Saying that, Zayusu immediately mounted Ro. He was followed by Crush. While Ro glared at Zayusu due to the sinister feeling of a pile of grass climbing astride it, Zayusu finally managed to calm it down. Then, let's go. The seating isn't very stable, so you'd best hang on to me. All right. Crush's arms encircled Zayusu's waist. The prickles from her weed outfit made Zayusu feel itchy. Zayusu frowned. This was not what he had imagined. Is something wrong? No, it's nothing. Let's go. Ro, I'll leave it to you. What exactly was making her so happy? Crush's cheerful laughter came from behind him, and as Ro lurched on, Zayusu was all smiles.